So in this video module, we are going to discuss we're going to start the systemic embryology. Okay, systemic embryology. And here we are, in this video, we will be discussing the head and neck development. Okay, head and neck development, where we'll be discussing the pharyngeal arches. Okay, then the development of tongue, pituitary gland, and development of face. Okay, so this much topic will be covered in head and neck development. Then the second half we will deal with the CVS. Okay, where we will see the development of heart. Okay, the veins, the pharyngeal arch arteries. Okay, pharyngeal arch arteries, and the last topic will be the fetal circulation. Okay, so this is the agenda for this video. So we'll first move on to the head and neck development. Okay, and I'm going to discuss about the pharyngeal arches. What are these pharyngeal arches? These are actually U-shaped structures. Okay, U-shaped structures that is formed in the pharynx, or that is seen in the pharynx. Okay, how they are formed? By the third week of development. Okay, by the third week, the neural crest cells, I hope everyone know what is the neural crest cells, they will migrate to the neck region. What is the neck region? That is the region between the head bulge and the cardiac bulge. Okay, so the neural crest cells will migrate to the neck region and forms the pharyngeal arches. Okay, pharyngeal arch. How many pharyngeal arch are there? There are 6 in number. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. What about 5? The fifth arch will regress. Okay, the fifth arch will regress. So the pharyngeal arches are 5 in number, and the fifth one will regress. Understand? Okay, now these are the pharyngeal arches. Okay, the U-shaped structures. Okay, the outer covering. Okay, the outer covering of the pharyngeal arch is formed by the ectoderm. Okay, the outer covering of the pharyngeal arch, that is what is marked in this red color. Okay, the outer covering of the pharyngeal arches is covered by the ectoderm, and what will you will get some structures there that is called as the pharyngeal cleft. Okay, pharyngeal cleft. Okay, and the inner covering, okay, the internal covering is formed by the endoderm. Okay, and what structures will get there? You will get the pharyngeal pouches. Understand? The outer covering you will get the outer covering is by the ectoderm, where it forms the pharyngeal cleft, and the inner covering is by endoderm, where it forms the pharyngeal pouch. Ecto, C for C, ecto for cleft. Okay, right? Now, what are the derivatives of this pharyngeal arches, or what all structures are formed from the pharyngeal arches? Okay, if you take a single pharyngeal arch, okay, from a pharyngeal arch, so many structures will form. Okay, pharyngeal arch. Each pharyngeal arch will have their own nerve supply. Okay, they will have their own arterial supply. Okay, then their own muscle, bones and cartilage will be formed. Okay, bones and cartilage will be derived from the pharyngeal arches. Then they have the muscles will be derived from the pharyngeal arches. Okay, then some miscellaneous structures. Okay, so this in this order we'll be studying in this order. Okay, what about each arch? Okay, what is the nerve supply, what is the arterial supply, which are the bones that is derived, which are the cartilages that is derived, which are the muscles that is formed from the pharyngeal arches, and the miscellaneous structures. Okay, so first I am going to talk about the first pharyngeal arch. First pharyngeal arch. This First pharyngeal arch has a specialty. Okay, it has actually an upper process. Okay, upper process which forms the maxilla, and a lower process which forms the mandible. Okay, only this first pharyngeal arch, it has two process. Okay, all other pharyngeal arch has only single process, but in case of the first pharyngeal arch, they have two process. Okay, the upper process forms the maxilla and the lower process mandible. Now coming to the nerve supply, it is the nerve supply. The nerve supply of the first pharyngeal arch is the mandibular nerve. Okay, that is the third branch of the fifth cranial nerve. Okay, third branch of the fifth cranial nerve, mandibular nerve. Now coming to the arterial supply. Arterial supply is by the maxillary artery. Okay, maxillary artery. Which are the bones or cartilages that is formed? The first pharyngeal arch forms a cartilage called as the Meckel's cartilage. Okay, and the bones that is formed include the maxilla, mandible, then the malleus, the incus. Okay, and it forms some ligaments. Okay, like the anterior malleolar ligament and the sphenopalatine ligament. Okay, two ligaments. Okay, this is about the bones and cartilages. Now coming to the muscles that is derived from the first pharyngeal arch. The important ones are the muscles of mastication. Okay, muscles of mastication. All muscles of mastication are derived from the first pharyngeal arch. Then the tensor tympani and tensor palatine. Tensor palatine. They are also derived from the first pharyngeal arch. Then the mylohyoid. Okay, mylohyoid and anterior belly of digastric. They are also derived from the first pharyngeal arch. Okay, and the miscellaneous structure that is derived from the first pharyngeal arch is the anterior two-third of the tongue. Okay, anterior two-third of the tongue is derived from the first pharyngeal arch. Understand the structures that is derived from the first pharyngeal arch? Now moving on to the second pharyngeal arch. Okay, second pharyngeal arch. In case of second pharyngeal arch, which is the nerve supply, the nerve is the facial nerve. Okay, the facial nerve is the nerve supply of the second pharyngeal arch, that is the cranial nerve 7. And the artery, which is the artery, it is the stapedial artery. Okay, stapedial artery. Okay, next is the cartilage or bone. The cartilage is the Richard's cartilage. Okay, Richard's cartilage. And bone, you have the stapes, you have the styloid process. Okay, then the lesser horn and upper body of hyoid. Okay, upper body of hyoid. Then it forms the stylohyoid ligament also. Right, so these are the bones and cartilage. Then coming to the muscles. What are the muscles that is derived from the second pharyngeal arch? The facial muscles. Okay, all the facial muscles are derived from the second pharyngeal arch. Okay, then the stapedial muscle, not stapedial, stapedius. Okay, stapedius muscle. Then the stylohyoid muscle and the posterior belly of digastric. Okay. Now miscellaneous structure is formed from the second pharyngeal arch. Okay, moving on to the third pharyngeal arch. Okay, third pharyngeal arch. from the third pharyngeal arch, which is a nerve supply in the third pharyngeal arch. It is the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, glossopharyngeal nerve, which is the ninth cranial nerve. Okay, glossopharyngeal nerve. Coming to the cartilages and bone, the greater horn. Okay, the greater horn and the lower body of the hyoid. Okay, greater horn and lower body of the hyoid is formed from the third pharyngeal arch. Okay, the muscles, only one muscle, that is the stylopharyngeus muscle. Okay, the laryngeal muscle, the pharyngeal muscle stylopharyngeus is formed from the third pharyngeal arch. And oh, I forgot to tell you the arterial supply. Okay, the arterial supply is like a bit different. Okay, the arterial supply includes the common carotid artery and the internal carotid artery. Common carotid and internal carotid. Okay, now the miscellaneous structure. Okay, miscellaneous structure is the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. If you take this third pharyngeal arch is very simple. Like you have to study only one bone, one muscle. Okay, then the arterial supply is something which we are familiar, common carotid and internal carotid, right? And one miscellaneous structure, that is the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. Comparatively simple pharyngeal arch. Okay, now moving on to the fourth pharyngeal arch. Okay, fourth pharyngeal arch. Okay, you can imagine, right? The first pharyngeal arch is forming the maxilla mandible, that is in the cranial part. The second pharyngeal arch, it forms the ear, the stapedius, the styloid. Okay, right? So in the inside, the something that is related to the ear. Okay, and the facial muscles. Okay, then it comes down. Okay, the third pharyngeal arch forms the hyoid bone, upper part of the the not upper part, it is the lower part of the hyoid bone, the pharyngeal muscle, that is the stylopharynx. So it is coming down. Okay, from the cranial end. Okay, right? So the fourth pharyngeal arch, it forms the nervous superior laryngeal nerve. Okay, superior laryngeal nerve, and this is a branch of vagus nerve, right? The 10th cranial nerve. Okay, vagus nerve. Then the artery, which is the arterial supply. The arterial supply is the right subclavian artery, which is formed from the right side of the fourth pharyngeal arch, and you have the aortic arch or arch of aorta. Okay, so these are the arterial supply, right subclavian artery and arch of aorta. Now coming to the bones and cartilage. Okay, coming to the bones and cartilage, let me wrap this. Okay. Now coming to the bones and cartilage. Our thyroid cartilage and the epiglottis, these are formed from the fourth pharyngeal arch. Very simple, thyroid cartilage and epiglottis, right? Now the muscles, what you need to know here is the palatal muscle. Okay, the palatal muscle, that is the palatoglossus. Okay, and the pharyngeal muscle, other than the stylopharyngeus, that you have the salpingopharyngeus and palatopharyngeus. Okay, and the cricothyroid. Okay, cricothyroid. Okay, these muscles are formed from the fourth pharyngeal arch. Understand? The nerve is superior laryngeal nerve, which is the branch of vagus nerve. Then artery is right subclavian artery and arch of aorta. The bones or cartilage, it includes the thyroid cartilage and epiglottis. Muscles include the palatal muscle, that's the palatoglossus, salpingopharyngeus, palatopharyngeus, and cricothyroid. So one miscellaneous structure that is formed by this fourth pharyngeal arch is the root of the tongue. Okay, so the root of the tongue is developed from the fourth pharyngeal arch. Okay, Now moving on to the sixth pharyngeal arch. Sixth pharyngeal arch. The sixth pharyngeal arch, the nerve supply is the internal, the recurrent laryngeal nerve. It is not internal laryngeal nerve, it is recurrent laryngeal nerve. My mistake. Okay, it is formed by the nerve supply is the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Okay, now the artery of the sixth pharyngeal arch is the ductus arteriosus and the pulmonary artery. Okay, pulmonary artery. These are the two arteries that is derived from the sixth pharyngeal arch. Okay, now coming to the cartilage. The cartilage includes our cricoid, then arytenoid, cuneiform and corniculate. Okay, so these four forms is formed from the sixth pharyngeal arch. Okay, moving on to the muscles. The muscles that is formed from the sixth pharyngeal arch. Okay, all laryngeal muscles. Okay, all laryngeal muscles except the, which is the muscle that is formed from the fourth pharyngeal arch, except the cricothyroid. Okay, so except the cricothyroid, all laryngeal muscles are formed from the sixth pharyngeal arch. Okay, then so this is about the pharyngeal arch. I think I have said about everything. I have nerve, artery, cartilage, muscles. Okay, no miscellaneous structure in the sixth pharyngeal arch. Okay, so these are the derivatives of the sixth pharyngeal arch. Now it will be easy for you to know the blood supply or the nerve supply. Okay, which muscle, like the palatoglossus. The palatoglossus is supplied by superior laryngeal nerve, which is because it is a muscle that is derived from the fourth pharyngeal arch, and the nerve of the fourth pharyngeal arch is superior laryngeal nerve. Simple, right? So if you study this, it will be easy to say the nerve supply. Okay, so this is about the pharyngeal arches. Now we have something more to discuss. We have the pharyngeal cleft and pharyngeal pouch. Okay, before that I'll show you something. Can you see here? These are the structures. Okay, the bone or the cartilage that is derived from the pharyngeal arches. Can you see here? Mandible from the first pharyngeal arch, right? Upper part of hyoid, upper body of hyoid and the lesser horn of hyoid, it is from the second pharyngeal arch. Lower body and the greater horn is from the third pharyngeal arch, right? The thyroid and the epiglottis is from the fourth pharyngeal arch. The cricoid, arytenoid, corniculate and cuneiform, they are from the sixth pharyngeal arch. Okay, so these are the cartilage or bone derivatives of the pharyngeal arches. Okay, now moving on to the pharyngeal pouch and cleft. Okay, the pharyngeal cleft. Okay, I'll discuss the pharyngeal cleft first. Okay, what can you see here? The first, the external openings. Okay, the external openings are from the pharyngeal cleft. Okay, because that is from the ectoderm, right? So the external openings are from the pharyngeal cleft, and the internal, whatever the openings that is present inside the body, they are from the pharyngeal pouches. Understand? So if you take the first pharyngeal cleft, okay, the first pharyngeal cleft, the first pharyngeal cleft will form our external auditory canal. Okay, that is the only external opening in the face. Okay, towards the lateral side. Okay, so the first pharyngeal cleft is formed by the will form the external auditory canal. Then what happens to the other pharyngeal cleft? All other pharyngeal cleft, they will get obliterated. How? The mesodermal overgrowth from the second pharyngeal arch, okay, they will covers the all other pharyngeal cleft. Okay, understand? And they forms a cervical sinus. Okay, it forms a cervical sinus. Understand? So only the first pharyngeal cleft will give rise to external auditory canal. All other pharyngeal clefts get obliterated due to the mesodermal overgrowth from the second pharyngeal arch. Okay. Now moving on to the pharyngeal pouch. Okay, pharyngeal pouch. This pharyngeal pouch, there are 6 pharyngeal pouches. Okay, 6 pharyngeal pouches, and we know the 5th one is regressed. Okay, so first we will see the derivatives of the pharyngeal pouches. Okay, the first pharyngeal pouch, can you see here the first pharyngeal pouch? What does it form? I'll just say, then I'll write. Okay, the first pharyngeal pouch, it will forms what is that is internal to the external auditory canal. We have the middle ear and the eustachian tube, right? So the middle ear and the eustachian tube is formed from by the first pharyngeal pouch. Okay, the second pharyngeal pouch, if you take the second pharyngeal pouch, it forms the epithelium of the palatine tonsil. Can you see the tonsil? And that the tonsil is formed from the neural crest cells. Okay, the epithelium of the palatine tonsil is formed from the second pharyngeal pouch. Coming to the third pharyngeal pouch, okay, the dorsal part of the third pharyngeal pouch, that this is the dorsal part, okay, it forms the inferior parathyroid. Okay, don't worry, I'll write it here. It forms the inferior parathyroid, and the ventral part, can you see the ventral part goes down and forms the thymus. Okay, so the inferior parathyroid is formed from the third pharyngeal pouch along with the thymus, that is the ventral part is forms the thymus. Coming to the fourth pharyngeal pouch, it forms the superior parathyroid. Okay, the fourth pharyngeal pouch forms the superior parathyroid. The sixth pharyngeal pouch, it forms a vestigial organ called as the ultimobronchial body. Okay, ultimobronchial body. It's a vestigial organ, but what is the significance of this? The neural crest cells will migrate to this ultimobronchial body and forms the parafollicular cells or the C cells. Okay, I'll write it here. So the first pharyngeal pouches, the first pharyngeal pouch will form the middle ear cavity and the eustachian tube. Okay, the second pharyngeal pouch, it forms the second pharyngeal pouch forms the epithelium of palatine tonsil. The third pharyngeal pouch, I told you, the dorsal side forms the inferior parathyroid and the ventral side forms the thymus. The fourth pharyngeal pouch, it forms the superior parathyroid, and the sixth pharyngeal pouch, it forms the ultimobronchial body. I told you the neural crest cells will migrate to this ultimobronchial body and forms the parafollicular cells. Okay, so with this we have completed the pharyngeal arch, their derivatives, pharyngeal cleft, their what it forms, and pharyngeal pouch and their derivative. Now I'm going to discuss some before the clinical condition. I'll just explain something. This is about the pharyngeal arch. Okay, the second pharyngeal arch, okay, the nerve of the second pharyngeal arch will give rise to a branch which will go and joins with the first pharyngeal arch nerve. Understand? The nerve of the second pharyngeal arch will give rise to a branch which will goes and joins with the nerve of the first pharyngeal arch. That nerve is called as the pretraumatic nerve. Okay, pretraumatic nerve. Okay. Similarly, the nerve of the third pharyngeal arch will give rise to a branch which will go and joins with the nerve of the second pharyngeal arch. Okay, so such nerve branches are called as a pretraumatic nerve. Okay, only the first and the second pharyngeal arches have this pretraumatic nerves. Okay, in case of the first arch, we know the normal nerve supply is the mandibular nerve. Okay, and that is called as the post-traumatic nerve. Okay, the nerve supply of the arch is called as post-traumatic nerve, And which is the pretraumatic nerve? The pretraumatic nerve is the cauda tympani, which is a branch of the facial nerve. Facial nerve is the nerve of second pharyngeal arch. Okay, so the facial nerve will give a branch, that is the cauda tympani, which will go and joins with the mandibular nerve, that is the branch of nerve of the first pharyngeal arch. Okay, so cauda tympani is the pretraumatic nerve of first pharyngeal arch. Similarly, the tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, the tympanic branch of glossopharyngeal nerve. You see here, it will goes and joins the second pharyngeal arch nerve, which is the facial nerve. Okay, so the second pharyngeal arch also has a pretraumatic nerve, that's the tympanic branch of the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, right? So this is about the traumatic nerves, pre-traumatic nerves and post-traumatic nerve. Now coming to the clinical conditions. Okay, clinical conditions that is associated with the pharyngeal arches. Okay, the first condition is called as DiGeorge syndrome. What is meant by DiGeorge syndrome? Here the third pharyngeal arch failed to differentiate. Okay, the third pharyngeal arch failed to differentiate. What are not third pharyngeal arch, third pharyngeal pouch. Third pharyngeal pouch failed to differentiate. What are the structures that is formed from the third pharyngeal pouch? These are the thymus. So the patient will have no thymus and no parathyroid. Okay, inferior parathyroid. No thymus means what? He will be increased susceptible to infections. Okay, increased chance of bacterial infection. Okay, no parathyroid means decreased calcium level, that will lead to tetany, and such condition is called as DiGeorge syndrome. Understand? Now coming to the second clinical condition, that is called as the Treacher-Collins syndrome. This means by Treacher-Collins syndrome. Here the first pharyngeal arch failed to differentiate. We know what are the structures that is formed from the first pharyngeal arch. The face we have the maxilla, the mandible. Okay, so these are not formed. Okay, so the patient will have facial asymmetry. Okay, facial asymmetry. Then inside you have the ear ossicles, right? So you will have ear anomaly, external ear anomaly. Then the patient will have lower lid coloboma. Okay, so these are the clinical features which you see in a patient with Treacher-Collins syndrome, because the first pharyngeal arch derivatives or the first pharyngeal arch will fail to differentiate. Okay, now the third syndrome is called as the Peary-Robin syndrome. Peary-Robin syndrome. Here the patient will have the mandible. Okay, here the mandible will be hypoplastic. Okay, the mandible will fail to form, or a hypoplastic mandible is formed. Okay, so the patient will have a hypoplastic mandible, right? So what we will what are the clinical features? Since the mandible is hypoplastic, the tongue will be posteriorly displaced. Okay, the tongue will be posteriorly displaced. Okay, and that is called as glossotosis. Then since there is mandible is hypoplastic, the palate will not be fused. They will not be fused, giving rise to cleft palate. Okay, so the patient will have cleft palate as well as cleft palate. Okay, so the posterior displacement of the tongue and cleft palate, which is seen in Peary-Robin syndrome, where the patient will have a hypoplastic mandible. Right, now coming to the fourth condition, that is called as a bronchial cyst. What is happening here? We know that the second, third, fourth, okay, the cleft, okay, the pharyngeal cleft from the second to the sixth is it is obliterated. Okay, obliterated to form what? Obliterated to form cervical sinus. Okay, it is obliterated to form cervical sinus, right? If this cervical sinus persists, okay, cervical sinus persist, it will give rise to a condition. That means if it persists in an adult life, you can see as a swelling. Okay, a swelling, it will present as a swelling in the upper neck region, and that is called as a bronchial cyst. Okay, now what happens if this cyst opens? The cyst opens to it will lead, the cyst opens, it can lead to sinus or fistula. Okay, if the opening is internally, where will it open? The internal opening will be in the tonsillar fossa. Okay, it will be in the tonsillar fossa. What about the external opening? The external opening will be in the lower part of neck. Okay, lower part of neck, along the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. Okay, along the anterior border of sternocleidomastoid. Okay, so the cyst can have an opening internally, or it can have an opening externally. Okay, that forms the sinus, internal sinus or external sinus. I told you the internal sinus is where it is in the tonsillar fossa, and the external sinus is in the lower part of the neck. Okay, on the along the anterior border of the sternocleidomastoid, right? So if there is connection between this internal, or this internal and external sinus are connected, then we get a fistula, right? So this fistula, it will be traveling between the external and internal carotid artery. So the fistula will be traveling between the external and internal carotid artery. And if you see a sinus, okay, a sinus in the lower part of neck, okay, lower neck, where you can see the saliva dribbling, okay, then it will indicate the bronchial fistula. Understand the clinical significance? So these are the clinical condition that is associated with the pharyngeal arches and pharyngeal pouches and pharyngeal cleft. Okay, next we are moving on to the development of tongue. What you need to know here is that the tongue is developed from the pharyngeal arches. I have already described when I described the miscellaneous structures, right? So the first pharyngeal arch, the third pharyngeal arch, and the fourth pharyngeal arch contribute in the formation of tongue. We'll see how. Okay, so the first pharyngeal arch, okay, the first pharyngeal arch will give rise to two swellings, okay, or two swellings are formed in the floor of the first pharyngeal arch, that is called as the lingual swelling. Along with that, one more structure is there, that is the tuberculum impar. Okay, tuberculum impar. Okay, this together will give rise, or this together will forms the anterior two-third of tongue. Understand? The anterior two-third of tongue is formed by the two lingual swelling and the tuberculum impar, right? From this much we can say the nerve supply will be the lingual nerve, which is the nerve or branch of mandibular nerve. Okay, so the anterior two-third of tongue is supplied by lingual nerve. Okay, and it's formed by the two lingual swelling and tuberculum impar, right? Moving on to the hypobranchial eminence. Okay, hypobranchial eminence of the third pharyngeal arch. It will give rise to the posterior one-third of tongue. Okay, the third pharyngeal arch, okay, it will give rise to the posterior one-third of tongue, right? So what is the nerve supply? The nerve supply will be, it will be the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, the superior laryngeal nerve or glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, now this is about from the third pharyngeal arch, right? The hypobranchial eminence of the fourth pharyngeal arch will forms what? It will forms the posterior most part or the root of tongue. Okay, so the root of tongue will be supplied by which nerve? From the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Okay, so understand how the three pharyngeal arch contribute in the formation of tongue. Right, now coming to the epithelium of tongue. Epithelium of tongue. The epithelium of tongue is formed by the anterior two-third is formed from the ectoderm, and the posterior one-third epithelium is formed from the endoderm. Okay, the anterior two-third is formed from the ectoderm and posterior one-third is formed from. In between this anterior two-third and posterior one-third, you have something called as the sulcus terminalis. Okay, so there is, if this is the tongue, this is the sulcus terminalis, and in front of the sulcus terminalis you have the circumvallate papillae. What is the specialty of the circumvallate papillae? Can you tell me? This circumvallate papillae forms the part of anterior two-third or posterior one-third. From its position, we can say that it forms the part of anterior two-third because this is the junction. But actually, the circumvallate papillae is formed from the posterior one-third, and later they will migrate to the anterior two-third. Understand? So the circumvallate papillae is formed from the endoderm. Okay, so it is an endodermal structure which had initially formed in the posterior one-third but later migrate to the anterior two-third. Okay, so it is an endodermal structure. Okay, this is about the epithelium. Now moving on to the muscles of tongue. Muscles of tongue. So there are four muscles: styloglossus, palatoglossus, hyoglossus and genioglossus. Okay, from the name itself, styloglossus means from the styloid process to the tongue. Palatoglossus from the palate to the tongue, right? Genioglossus from the mandible to the tongue, and hyoglossus from the hyoid bone to the tongue. Understand? Right. Out of this palatoglossus, it is a muscle of palatoglossus is a muscle of fourth pharyngeal arch, right? So it is supplied by the fourth pharyngeal arch is supplied by. It is supplied by the superior laryngeal nerve. Okay, supplied by the superior laryngeal nerve. The other three, the styloglossus, hyoglossus, the genioglossus. Okay, the other three, styloglossus, hyoglossus and genioglossus, they are formed from the paraxial mesoderm. Okay, paraxial mesoderm, or I can say the occipital somite. Okay, occipital somite, and that is why the other three are supplied by the hypoglossal nerve. Okay, hypoglossal nerve, that is the cranial nerve 12. Understand? The palatoglossus is the muscle of fourth pharyngeal arch, and that is why it is supplied by the superior laryngeal nerve, whereas the other three muscles, styloglossus, hyoglossus and genioglossus, they are developed from the occipital somite or the paraxial mesoderm, and they are supplied by the hypoglossal nerve. Coming to the nerve supply. Nerve supply, I'll first take about the motor supply, which we have already discussed. Okay, motor supply, I told you, palatoglossus is supplied by the superior laryngeal nerve. Okay, and the other three are supplied by the hypoglossal nerve. Now coming to the sensory supply is what you need to know here. The sensory supply. Okay, sensory supply for the anterior two-third. Okay, for general sensation you have, which is a nerve. From which arch? Anterior two-third is developed from the first arch. So the nerve is lingual nerve. Okay, then you have special sensation. Okay, special sensation is supplied by the pretraumatic nerve of the first pharyngeal arch, that is the chorda tympani. Understand? Chorda tympani, right? Now coming to the posterior one-third. Okay, here the special as well as the general sensation. Okay, special and general sensation are supplied by the Glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, glossopharyngeal nerve, because it developed from the third arch. Okay, third arch. Now the posterior most or the root is supplied by the, is developed from the fourth arch, right? So it is supplied by the superior laryngeal nerve. Okay, superior laryngeal nerve. And the branch of the superior laryngeal nerve that supplies the posterior or the root of the tongue is called as the internal laryngeal branch. Here, branch. Okay, internal laryngeal branch. Okay, so this is about the nerve supply of the tongue. Okay, so we have completed the development of the tongue, muscles, epithelium of the tongue, and nerve supply of the tongue, right? Now we will move on to the development of pituitary. Okay, so next is the development of pituitary gland. Right, so if you take the pituitary gland, it has two parts, right? One is the adenohypophysis, then you have the neurohypophysis. Adenohypophysis is the anterior pituitary, whereas the neurohypophysis is the posterior pituitary. Okay, these two parts different from two different structures. Okay, if you take the adenohypophysis, okay, it develops from the surface ectoderm. Okay, surface ectoderm. Okay, this red color represents the surface ectoderm. Okay, from the surface ectoderm or from the stomatodium, a pouch will arise, and that is called as the Rathke's pouch. Okay, Rathke's pouch. Okay, this is the Rathke's pouch. This Rathke's pouch will forms the pars tuberalis, pars distalis, pars intermedia, and pars anterior. Okay, so these four structures of the anterior pituitary is formed from the surface ectoderm or the Rathke's pouch. Whereas, what is this? This is the neuroectoderm. Okay, the neuroectoderm will give rise to the pars nervosa or the neurohypophysis or the posterior pituitary. Understand? So it is a complex organ which the anterior pituitary arises from the stomatodium or the Rathke's pouch, whereas the posterior pituitary arises from the neuroectoderm. Okay. Now moving on to the development of face. Okay. The face develops from a number of processes. First, I will write the processes. Okay. I'll note down the name of the processes that is associated with the development of face. Okay. The first one is the frontonasal process. First, I will write down the process, then I'll explain which this process will derive into. Okay. Second, you have the medial nasal process. Okay. Third, you have the lateral nasal process. Then fourth, the maxillary process. And fifth, the mandibular process. Okay, now we will see the frontonasal process will forms which part? It forms the forehead. Okay, the frontonasal process forms the forehead. The medial nasal process, it forms the philtrum and the primitive palate. Okay, philtrum and primitive palate or palate. Okay, the lateral nasal process, it forms the ala of the nose. Okay, the maxillary process forms the upper lip and cheeks. Okay, upper lip and cheek. The mandibular process forms the lower lip and cheek. Understand? So these are the processes, and each process will derive into each part of the face. Okay, forehead from the frontonasal process, medial nasal process from the philtrum and the palate, lateral nasal process from the upper lip and cheek, maxillary forms the upper lip and cheek, mandibular forms the lower lip and cheek. Now, there are certain clinical conditions associated with the failure of the fusion of this process. First, we'll see them. First one is the midline cleft upper lip. That means if this is the nose, okay, there is a cleft here. This is the lips, okay. So this is a cleft here, midline cleft, okay. And what will be the cause of this midline cleft? Here if you see, which is absent? The philtrum is absent. One second. Okay, so the midline cleft upper lip. What is absent here? The philtrum. Okay, philtrum is absent. And there will be cleft palate associated with this. This is due to the absence of fusion of the medial nasal process. Okay, we'll have two medial nasal process. Okay, if they fail to fuse, the right and left medial nasal process fail to fuse, they will give rise to midline left upper lip. Okay, right. The second one is the cleft upper lip, okay, or hair lip. Okay, here if this is the nose, so here you can see a cleft, okay, that is called as hair lip. Okay, here it is due to the failure of fusion of the medial nasal process with the maxillary process. Okay, here the maxillary process will feel which side is the, first you see which side is the cleft. Okay, if it is in the right side, that means the right medial nasal process doesn't fuse with the right maxillary process. Okay, if the cleft is in the left side, then that means the left medial nasal process fail to fuse with the left maxillary process. Okay, that is called as the cleft lip or hair lip. Okay, now coming to the third one, you have the oblique facial cleft. Okay, here you can see is from the below the eyes. Okay, from below the eyes, the lift a cleft will be formed that will be connecting to the upper lip. Okay, from it will extend from below the eyes to the upper lip on one side. Okay, that means that side lateral nasal process. Okay, so the failure of fusion of lateral nasal process with the maxillary process. Okay, if it is in the left side, we can say the left lateral nasal process will fail to fuse with the maxillary process. Okay, so the oblique facial cleft will extend from below the eye to the upper lip. Okay, and that is due to the failure of fusion of the left nasal process with the maxillary process. Okay, fourth one is the lower lip cleft or the cleft lower lip. It is due to the failure of fusion of the mandibular process. Okay, failure of fusion of mandibular process. Okay, so this is about the clinical conditions associated with the development of face. Okay, you have a midline cleft upper lip, that is due to the fusion of the two medial nasal processes. Then you have cleft upper lip or hair lip, that is on one side, which is due to the failure of fusion of the medial nasal process with the maxillary process. Then you have the oblique facial cleft, where the failure of fusion of the lateral nasal process with the maxillary process, and lower lip cleft, where the failure of fusion of the mandibular process. Okay, so these are the clinical conditions associated with the development of face. Okay, now coming to the development of the cardiovascular system. Okay, CVS embryology. Right. So which is the main content of the cardiovascular system? That is our heart, right? So from where this heart is formed? It is formed from the splanchno-pleuric lateral plate mesoderm. Okay, the splanchno-pleuric lateral plate mesoderm forms the heart. Okay, which part? The part that is cranial to the precaudal plate. Okay, precaudal plate will develop into heart. Okay, that is by third week. Okay, the angioblastic cells will form two tubes. Okay, two tubes. And what happens? These two tubes will fuses together to give rise to a single heart tube. Okay, a single heart tube. Okay, right. Now, 5 dilatations occur in the heart tube. Okay, 5 dilatations occur in the heart tube. I'll say which are the 5 dilatation. Okay, and like this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and this is the cranial part. Okay, the cranial part will forms the ventricle and the outflow tract. Okay, and the caudal part will form the atria and the inflow tract. But what happens? Later there will be folding of this heart tube. Okay, so that the atrial part, they will goes up and posterior. Understand? There will be folding of this heart tube result, so that the atrial part will goes up and the posterior, and the ventricular part, the ventricular and the outflow tract, okay, they will comes down and becomes anterior. Understand what happened? The folding of the heart tube causes the atria to go up and posterior, so that the ventricular part will comes down and anterior. Okay, now we'll see the 5 dilatations. Can you see which are the 5 dilatation here? I'll write it down. The first dilatation is the truncus arteriosus. So this is the truncus arteriosus. Can you see? The truncus arteriosus, the first dilatation. Okay, the second dilatation is the bulbus cordis. Second. Okay, so the second dilatation is the bulbus cordis. Okay, this is the bulbus cordis. The third dilatation is the primitive ventricle. Third one is the primitive ventricle. The fourth one is the primitive atrium. And the fifth one is the sinus venosus. Okay, this is the fifth one, or the sinus venosus. Okay, so the first one, it is the truncus arteriosus. The second one, the bulbus cordis. Third one, the primitive ventricle. Fourth one, the primitive atrium. And fifth one, the sinus venosus. Understand? Right. Now I'll explain what this each one will forms. Okay, or how each dilatation will give rise to each part of the heart. Okay, so first we will start from the cranial direction itself. Okay, so from the truncus arteriosus. This truncus arteriosus, this actually forms the outflow tract of the heart. Okay, outflow tract, that means the truncus arteriosus will forms what? It will forms the aorta and pulmonary artery. But how? Because the neural crest cells will migrate to truncus arteriosus and forms the aortopulmonary septum. Okay, aortopulmonary septum. And this septum will divide the aorta and pulmonary artery. Understand? The septum will divide the aorta and pulmonary artery. I will speak about this later in detail. Okay, just know that the truncus arteriosus forms the outflow tract, that is the aorta and pulmonary artery. Right. Now coming to the second dilatation, that is the bulbus cordis. Okay, bulbus cordis. This bulbus cordis has a conus part and the proximal 1/3. Okay, it has a conus part and the proximal 1/3. It is divided into a conus part and proximal 1/3. This conus part forms the infundibulum of the ventricle. Okay, it forms the infundibulum of the ventricle. The conus part forms the infundibulum of ventricle. And the proximal 1/3, it forms the smooth area of the ventricle. It forms the smooth area of the ventricle. Okay, the bulbous cordis forms the smooth area of the ventricle. If you see, there is some orifices or some areas that is connecting the each dilatation. Okay, so in between the bulbous cordis, one second. Okay, in between the bulbous cordis and the primitive ventricle, you have a bulboventricular sulcus. This is not the dilatation, it is a space. If this is a bulbous cordis and this is a primitive ventricle, there is a connection. Okay, that is called as bulboventricular sulcus. Okay, and this bulboventricular sulcus contains something. Okay, or it contains cells that will later forms the interventricular septum. Okay, interventricular septum. Okay, so the part of interventricular septum will develop from the bulboventricular sulcus, which I'll explain when I explain about the formation of interventricular septum. Okay, right. Now coming to the third chamber, that is the primitive ventricle. Primitive ventricle. This primitive ventricles forms the rough area of ventricle. Okay, rough area of ventricle. Right, and the fourth one is the primitive atrium, which forms the rough area of atrium. Okay, now the fifth chamber, that is the sinus venosus. This is a special chamber. Why? If you take the sinus venosus, it is like this. It has a right horn and it has a left horn. Okay, and to the right horn and left horn, 3 veins will enter. Okay, or 3 veins will drain into the right horn as well as the left horn. Which are the 3 veins that enter into the sinus venosus? First vein is the right common cardinal vein. Okay, right common cardinal vein. Then right umbilical vein, right vitelline vein. In left side, you have the left vitelline vein, left umbilical vein, and the left common cardinal vein. Okay, I'll just write common cardinal vein, right and left. Then you have umbilical vein, right and left, and vitelline vein, right and left. Okay, these veins will enter into the horn of the sinus venosus. Right, now what I am going to say is this is the body of the sinus venosus. Okay, so the body and right horn of the sinus venosus. Okay, body and right horn, they forms the smooth part or smooth area of right atrium. Body and the right horn, they forms the smooth area of the right atrium. The left horn, it will obliterate and forms what? And forms the coronary sinus. I think you should know what is a coronary sinus, right? That is the area from where the blood, venous blood from the heart is drained into the right atrium. Okay, so it forms the left horn forms the coronary sinus. Understand which part develops into which structure? Okay, right. Now in between this, can you see here, in between the primitive atria and the ventricle, you have a endocardial cushion. This endocardial cushion helps in the formation of the interventricular septum as well as the interatrial septum. Okay, endocardial cushion helps in the formation of interventricular septum as well as the interatrial septum. Okay, right. So this is about the heart tube and its which are the structures that form from the heart tube. Okay, now we are going to see the development of the interatrial septum followed by interventricular septum. Okay, before that I forgot to tell you about the neural crest cell. Right, neural crest cell. This neural crest cell will migrate migrate to where? Will migrate to the truncus arteriosus. I think I told you truncus arteriosus. Okay, and forms what? And forms, actually it forms the conotruncal septum. Okay, conotruncal septum. What is meant by conotruncal septum? It has two parts. One is the septum that is present in the truncus part, which is called as the spiral septum, which forms the spiral septum, which will develop into the aortopulmonary septum. And the conal part, okay, the conal part that forms the bulbar septum, which forms the infundibular part of the interventricular septum. Understand? So this neural crest cells will migrate to the truncus arteriosus and forms a conotruncal septum, which has two parts. One is the truncal part and the other is the conal part or the bulbar septum. The truncal part is also called as a spiral septum. Why it is called as spiral septum? Because this septum, the truncals or the aortopulmonary septum, they will undergo a spiraling, okay, or they will twist around itself, okay, they will undergo spiraling, okay, before attaining their original positions, okay, that's why it is called as a spiral septum, okay. Now I'll explain about the clinical conditions that is associated with the abnormalities in this spiraling as well as the neural tube migration, okay. So first condition which I am going to speak is what happens if this aortopulmonary septum, that septum formed, is displaced anteriorly. Okay, what happens if that septum is displaced anteriorly? If this is the pulmonary artery and this is the aorta, okay, instead of here the septum comes here. This is the new septum, okay. Instead of this position, the septum comes here. What happens? What can you see here? The pulmonary artery is reduced, right? That is called as pulmonary stenosis. So when there is pulmonary stenosis, what will happen to the right ventricular pressure? The right ventricular pressure will increase, right? The right ventricular pressure will increase, resulting in right ventricular hypertrophy, right? So when the right ventricular hypertrophy increases, right, the blood from the right ventricle, the chances that the blood from the right ventricle will goes into the aorta, because here it is aorta is there, right? So that's called as overriding of aorta. Then when there is increased right ventricular hypertrophy, overriding of aorta, to compensate that, a VSD will be formed here, right, ventricular septal defect, so the blood can pass to right ventricle to the left ventricle, okay. What are this condition called as? Pulmonary stenosis, right ventricular hypertrophy, overriding of aorta, ventricular septal defect. That is called as the tetralogy of Fallot. It's called as a tetralogy of Fallot. Understand? Now, to this tetralogy of Fallot, if I add ASD, if the patient is also developing ASD here, it will lead to pentology of Fallot. Okay, pentology of Fallot. Understand? This tetralogy of Fallot occurs when the aortopulmonary septum is displaced anteriorly. Okay. Now, the second condition, it occurs when there is non-spiraling of aortopulmonary septum. If there is no spiraling of the aortopulmonary septum, what happens? The blood from the right ventricle will goes to aorta. The blood from the left ventricle will goes to pulmonary artery, right? From the blood that is from the right ventricle will pass on to the aorta, because here you have aorta here and here you have pulmonary artery, because the spiraling is not occurring, okay. So the blood from the right ventricle will pass on to the aorta, and from the left ventricle it will goes to the pulmonary artery, and that is called as the transposition of great arteries. Transposition of great arteries, or TGA. Okay. Now the third condition. Here the neural crest cells are not migrating. Okay, they are not migrating to the truncus arteriosus. Okay, so there will be any septum? No septum. It will lead to the persistence of truncus arteriosus. Understand? It will lead to the persistence of truncus arteriosus. Okay, so these are the three clinical conditions associated with the aortopulmonary septum. Okay, now coming to the interatrial septum. Okay, if you see, this is the atria or atrial primitive atrial chamber. Okay, here you have what? You have the endocardial cushion which separated from the ventricular chamber, right? So from the primitive atrial chamber, a septum will started to develop, which will divide the primitive atrial chamber into right atria and left atria. Okay, a septum will start to grow downwards towards the endocardial cushion, or we'll call it as AV cushion. Okay, so this septum is called as the septum primum. Okay, this is called as a septum primum, right? So there is a connection or pathway from the right atria to the left atria, from right atria to the left atria, and that is called as the ostium primum. Symbol. Okay, now what happens? This septum will go down and comes and touches the endocardial cushion. Okay, so that the ostium primum gets obliterated. Okay, the septum will go down, touches the endocardial cushion, the ostium primum get obliterated. Okay, now what happens? Fenestration will occur. Okay, fenestration will occur in the ostium primum. Okay, not ostium primum, the septum primum. Sorry, the fenestrations will occur in the septum primum. So fenestrations in the septum primum will lead to what? Fenestrations in the septum primum will lead to the formation of a second ostium, that is called as the ostium secundum. Understand? After the septum primum comes and joins to the endocardial cushion, the ostium primum get obliterated, right? So now new fenestrations will formed in the septum primum, and it will give rise to a new channel that is called as the ostium secundum. Understand? Ostium secundum. Now a second septum will started to form adjacent to the septum primum, and that is called as the septum secundum. Okay, septum secundum. Okay, a second septum will started to form from the adjacent to the septum primum. We will call it as the septum secundum. Okay, right? So if you clearly see, from the blood will be going to flow from the right atria, there is a gap between the septum primum and septum secundum, or a canal between the septum primum and septum secundum, and that is called as a connection is formed between the septum secundum and the septum primum, and that connection is called as the foramen ovale. Okay, a connection is formed between the septum secundum and septum primum called as the foramen ovale, right? So the blood will be passed from the right atrium to the foramen ovale to the ostium secundum, and from the ostium secundum to the left atrium. Okay, right atrium, blood will passes through the foramen ovale, from the foramen ovale to the ostium secundum, and from the ostium secundum to the left atrium. Okay, right. Now this is the flowing of blood, okay, from the right atrium. This is the foramen ovale, right, from the foramen ovale to the ostium secundum, and from the ostium secundum to the left atrium, okay, right. So here you can see this is the septum secundum and this is the septum primum, okay. So how we will identify this, or how we will differentiate this foramen ovale from the ostium secundum? Remember that the foramen ovale is always inferior, and ostium secundum is always superior, is 4s, okay. So the ostium secundum is, this is okay, ostium secundum is always superior and the foramen ovale is always inferior, right. Now what happens after birth? After birth, we know immediately after birth the foramen ovale closes, okay, foramen ovale closes. But how this closes? After birth there will be blood flow to the left atrium from the pulmonary veins, okay. So when this blood flow from the pulmonary veins to the left atrium occurs, there will be increased in the left atrial pressure, okay, and this left atrial pressure will make the two septums to fuse together, okay. So this increased left atrial pressure fuses the septum, okay. So when the septum fuses, what happens to these openings? These openings will close, okay. So if you see the foramen ovale, it will fuses with the septum secundum, whereas the ostium secundum, that will fuses with the septum primum. Understand? The foramen ovale will fuses with the septum secundum and the ostium secundum will fuses with the septum primum. So if you take the remnants, the foramen ovale will form fossa ovalis, FO, okay, foramen ovale, fossa ovalis, right, and this septum secundum, it forms a limbus fossa ovalis, okay, limbus fossa ovalis, okay. It is a elevation that surrounds the fossa ovalis, that is the limbus fossa ovalis, which is a remnant of septum secundum, okay, right. So this is about the development of the interatrial septum. Now moving on to the interventricular septum. Interventricular septum. Actually, the interventricular septum has three parts. One is the muscular part or muscular layer. Then it has a membranous layer, and it has an infundibular layer or infundibular part, right. The muscular layer is formed by the cells that is present in the bulboventricular sulcus, okay. The proliferation of the cells in the bulboventricular sulcus, okay, or I can say these are the heart muscle, that is the myocardium, okay, right. And the membranous layer, it is formed from the endocardial cushion or the AV cushion, and the infundibular part, it is occurs from the conotruncal septum, okay, that is from the, which is a derivative of neural crest cells, okay. So this is the three parts of the interventricular septum, and from where this each part develops, okay. The muscular layer from the proliferation of the heart cells in the bulboventricular sulcus, the membranous layer from the AV cushion, and the infundibular part is from the conotruncal septum, that's the bulbar part of the conotruncal septum, that is a derivative of the neural crest cells, okay. So we have completed the interatrial septum and interventricular septum, okay. Now we'll move on to the development of veins. Okay, I told you three veins will be joining the horn of the sinus venosus. Which are the three veins? The common cardinal vein, okay, then right and left common cardinal vein, this is the common cardinal vein, okay, then you have the umbilical vein. Umbilical vein. Can you see here the umbilical veins? The right umbilical vein and the left umbilical vein. And third is the vitelline vein. Okay, vitelline vein. Right. Now I'll explain how these veins will develop into the different veins. Okay, or how the different veins around the heart is developed. Okay. First, I'll take with the inner one, that is the vitelline vein. Okay, I'm going to explain about the vitelline vein. Okay, right. This vitelline vein, this will form 3 anastomoses. Okay, anastomoses around the duodenum. Okay, if you see, this is the C-shaped duodenum. This vitelline vein will form 3 anastomoses. First, two ventral anastomosis and 1 dorsal anastomosis. Okay, the ventral anastomosis is called as the proximal ventral anastomosis and distal ventral anastomosis. Okay, proximal ventral anastomosis and distal ventral anastomosis, and 1 dorsal anastomosis. Right. Now, what are the structures that is formed from the vitelline vein? The structures that form from the vitelline vein includes the portal vein, okay, hepatic vein, then the ductus venosus, and the cranial part of the inferior vena cava. Okay, so these are the veins that is formed from the vitelline vein. How these are formed, I'll explain. Okay, right. So if you take the vitelline vein, this is the distal ventral anastomosis. This is the proximal ventral anastomosis and the dorsal anastomosis. Okay, so first, so the dorsal anastomosis. Okay, dorsal anastomosis plus the part of the right vitelline vein. Okay, part of the right vitelline vein, that is this is for it. This is the dorsal anastomosis and part of the right vitelline vein. Okay, so the part of the right vitelline vein that is between the dorsal anastomosis and the proximal ventral anastomosis. Okay, between dorsal anastomosis and proximal ventral anastomosis. Okay, this will forms the portal vein. Understand? The portal vein. Okay, so the part that is present between the dorsal anastomosis and the part that is present between the dorsal anastomosis and the proximal ventral anastomosis of the right vitelline vein will forms the portal vein. Now, this will enter this from the after the proximal anastomosis, this plexus will enter into the liver. This is the liver. Okay, so the plexus will enter into the liver, and the plexus that is in the liver will later forms the sinusoids in the liver. Okay, it will forms the sinusoids of the liver. Okay, and the part that is proximal to this sinusoid, okay, that forms the hepatocardiac channel. Okay, that is the hepatocardiac channel. This is the hepatocardiac channel which will joins the sinus venosus, and this hepatocardiac channel forms the cranial part of IVC or the inferior vena cava. Okay, right, the portal veins, the sinusoids and the cranial part of IVC that is formed from the vitelline vein. Right, now moving on to the umbilical vein. Initially, there are 2 umbilical veins, right umbilical vein and left umbilical vein. The right umbilical vein will obliterate. Okay, now only the left umbilical vein will remains. Okay, and this will carry what? This will carry oxygenated blood from the placenta to the fetus. Okay, and this umbilical vein, okay, they will reaches where? Umbilical vein reaches the till the liver. Okay, right, and from the liver what will it do? instead of going into the liver, it will bypass the liver, or it will form a shunt to the hepatocardiac channel of the right vitelline vein. Okay, hepatocardiac channel of the right vitelline vein, that which later forms into the inferior vena cava, and that shunt is called as the ductus venosus. Okay, so the left umbilical vein, instead of going into the liver, it will forms a shunt to the cranial part of the inferior vena cava, or the hepatocardiac channel of the right vitelline vein, and that forms the ductus venosus. Okay, right. This left umbilical vein later obliterate to give rise to ligamentum teres. Okay, it will obliterate to form ligamentum teres, and the ductus venosus will forms the ligamentum venosum. Okay, ligamentum venosum. Okay, the left umbilical vein will form the ligamentum teres, and the ductus venosus will forms the ligamentum venosum. Okay, now moving on to the so now we'll move on to the common cardiac vein. Okay, right, coming to the common cardiac vein. Okay, so before explaining, just let me list down the coming to the common cardiac vein. This is the common cardiac, or the derivatives of the common cardiac vein. I'll simplify it. Okay, the right common cardiac vein forms, or it has two branches. Okay, this is the right anterior vein, anterior cardiac vein, the right posterior cardiac vein, which will joins together to form right common cardiac vein. Similarly, you have the left anterior cardiac vein, left posterior cardiac vein, will join together to form left common cardiac. The right common cardiac will drain into the right horn of the sinus venosus, and the left common cardiac will drain into the left horn of the sinus venosus. Okay, right. This is the common cardiac vein. Okay, right anterior cardiac vein, right posterior cardiac vein, left anterior cardiac vein, and left posterior cardiac vein. Right. Now there is an anastomosis, oblique anastomosis between the right anterior cardiac vein and the left anterior cardiac vein. Okay, a oblique anastomosis between the right anterior cardiac vein and left anterior cardiac veins. Now first let me just write down the veins that is developed from the cardiac veins. Okay, the first one is the internal jugular vein. Okay, then you have the right subclavian. Not right subclavian. Subclavian is actually the vein that drains into the cardiac veins. Okay, right subclavian is not a part of cardiac the cardiac veins. Okay, it's a vein that drains into the right anterior cardiac veins. Okay, right subclavian vein, and whereas the left subclavian vein will drains into the left anterior cardiac vein. So okay, so it is not a derivative of the cardiac veins, right? The second derivative is the right brachiocephalic vein. Okay, the right brachiocephalic vein. Then you have the left brachiocephalic vein. Then you have the superior vena cava. Okay, so these are the veins that is going to arise from the cardiac veins. Okay, we'll see how. Okay, so this is the common cardiac vein, and I told you there is two, and the oblique anastomosis that is present between the right anterior cardiac vein and the left anterior cardiac vein. And I told you the right subclavian veins will drain into the right anterior cardiac vein. Can you see here the blue one? The right subclavian vein will drain into the right anterior cardiac vein, and the left subclavian vein will drain into the left anterior cardiac veins. Okay, now we will see the veins. Okay, the first part, this part forms the jugular vein. Okay, internal jugular vein. I'm writing it as 1. Okay, so the 1 will give rise to the internal jugular vein, right? The anterior cardiac, the proximal or the cranial end of the anterior cardiac vein will give rise to the internal jugular vein, the right and left internal jugular vein. Right now, the right anterior cardiac vein between the openings of the right subclavian. This is the opening of right subclavian, right? So the right anterior cardiac vein between the opening of the right subclavian vein and the oblique anastomosis. Okay, please note down the right anterior cardiac vein, which is between the opening of the right subclavian vein, between opening of first one right subclavian vein and the oblique anastomosis. Okay, oblique anastomosis, that will forms the right brachiocephalic vein. Okay, now I'm going to write as 2. So the second one is the right brachiocephalic vein, okay, which is formed between the right cardiac vein between the opening of the right subclavian vein as well as the oblique anastomosis forms the right brachiocephalic vein. Now coming to the left brachiocephalic vein, okay, that is the third one, that is formed from the left anterior cardiac vein, that is between the opening of the left subclavian vein and the oblique anastomosis plus the oblique anastomosis itself. Okay, so it is the oblique anastomosis plus the left anterior cardiac vein, which is formed between the opening of the left subclavian vein and oblique anastomosis. Okay, right, so this is a part of the left anterior cardiac vein which is present between the opening of the left subclavian vein and the oblique anastomosis plus the oblique anastomosis, that will forms the left brachiocephalic vein or the third vein. Okay, now forms the fourth one, that is the superior vena cava. Okay, the part of the left anterior cardiac vein that is below the oblique anastomosis and the not left, right. Okay, and the right common cardiac vein. Okay, so what is the fourth one or the superior vena cava is formed of? It is formed of the part of the right cardiac vein that is below oblique anastomosis. Okay, that is present below the oblique anastomosis plus the right common cardiac vein. Okay, that will form the inferior superior vena cava, that will form the superior vena cava. Understand the derivatives of the common cardiac veins? It have internal jugular vein, right and left internal jugular vein formed from the cranial part of the right and left anterior cardiac veins. Second one, right brachiocephalic vein, that is a part of right cardiac vein between the opening of the right subclavian vein and as well as the oblique anastomosis. Then left brachiocephalic vein, that is the part of the left anterior cardiac vein between the opening of the left subclavian vein and the oblique anastomosis plus the oblique anastomosis, and the superior vena cava which is formed between the right anterior cardiac vein that is below the oblique anastomosis plus the right common cardiac vein. Okay, what happens to this part, the left anterior cardiac vein that is below the oblique anastomosis? It will get obliterated or dissolved. Okay, what happens if this part, the left anterior cardiac vein below the oblique anastomosis persists and the oblique anastomosis is not present? Okay, now we are going to deal with a condition where the left anterior cardiac vein, okay, left anterior cardiac vein below the oblique anastomosis persists and the oblique anastomosis is absent. Okay, plus oblique anastomosis is absent. Just look here, oblique anastomosis persists. This oblique anastomosis is absent. This part persists. That means the left common cardiac vein or the left anterior cardiac vein will come to the left common cardiac vein and they will drain into the left horn, which is the coronary sinus, and the right anterior cardiac vein will comes to the right common cardiac vein and drain into the right atrium, right? That means you will get a right superior vena cava which will drain into the right atrium or the right horn of the sinus venosus, and you will get a left superior vena cava which will drain into the coronary sinus. Am I right? And this is called as the double superior vena cava. Double superior vena cava, right? Where you will have a right superior vena cava which will drain into the right atrium and a left superior vena cava which will drain into the coronary sinus. Okay, and this is called as double superior vena cava. Understand? Okay, now what I am going to explain is about the formation of inferior vena cava. Okay, formation of inferior vena cava. And what you need to know is that the inferior vena cava is actually formed from right posterior cardiac vein, mainly from the right posterior cardiac vein. Okay, and this is actually they are formed in different parts. Okay, different parts of the vein will joins together to form inferior vena cava. I'll show. So see here, this is the posterior cardiac vein. Okay, which posterior cardiac vein? Right posterior cardiac vein. Okay, so the first part of the inferior vena cava is going to form from the right posterior cardiac vein, right? And before that, just let me just draw this. Okay, this is the posterior cardiac vein, right? Posterior cardiac vein. Here you have the supracardiac vein. This is the supracardiac vein, and this is the subcardiac vein. Okay, this is the subcardiac vein. Okay, just know this is the supracardiac vein and this is the subcardiac vein. Then only you will understand. And this is the posterior cardiac vein. Okay, right. So now look here. So the first part of the inferior vena cava is formed from the right posterior cardiac vein below the supracardiac vein. Okay, below the supracardinal vein. Okay, and this part of the posterior cardiac vein that is below the supracardinal vein is called as the sacrocardinal vein. Okay, it is called as the sacrocardinal vein. So I can say that the first part of the inferior vena cava is from sacrocardinal vein. Okay, now coming to the second part, that is formed from the supracardinal vein. Okay, supracardinal vein, right? And look at the third part. The third part is the anastomosis between the supracardinal and subcardinal vein. Okay, subcardinal vein. Just let me write in the next page. Okay, so the first part, it is between the sacrocardinal vein. Second part from the supracardinal vein. Third part is the anastomosis between the supra and subcardinal vein. Okay, the fourth part is from the subcardinal vein. Okay, the fifth part, look here, this is the fourth part, that is the subcardinal vein. The fifth part is between the anastomosis between the subcardinal vein and the hepatovitalline, the right vitelline, that is the right hepatocardiac channel of the vitelline vein. Okay, right? So now I'm going to write the fifth part. It is between the anastomosis between the subcardinal vein and the right hepatocardiac channel. Okay, which is a part of the right vitelline vein. Okay, and the sixth part is from the right vitelline vein or the right hepatocardiac channel. Okay, so these are the 6 part of the inferior vena cava, right? Now I'll just draw it here for you once again. This is the distal end. Okay, inferior vena cava. This is the sacrocardinal vein, okay, sacrocardinal vein, and this will forms the inferior portion, okay, or the starting portion of the inferior vena cava. This will form the initial portion or the starting portion of the inferior vena cava. Then above you have the supracardinal vein, okay, supracardinal vein. This forms the infrarenal part, okay, infrarenal portion or infrarenal part, okay. Then after that you have the anastomosis between the supracardinal vein and the subcardinal vein, okay, or the subcardinal part I can say. This forms the renal and suprarenal area, okay, that is the subcardinal portion, subcardinal vein, okay. After the subcardinal vein there is the vitelline vein, okay, the anastomosis between the subcardinal vein, the vitelline vein and the vitelline vein, that forms the hepatic portion, okay. And you have the vitelline vein which forms the cranial part of the inferior vena cava. Understand the inferior vena cava? Okay, so this is how, these are the 6 parts of the inferior vena cava, okay. Now this, which side is it formed? It formed from the right side, okay, it is formed from the right side, so the left has to get obliterated, right? So we have seen that all these are arising from the right side, okay, that is usually the left side obliterates, okay, usually the left side obliterates. But what happens if the left side persists? The left side persists, that is the left sacrocardinal vein or the left supracardinal vein or the left subcardinal veins, okay. What happens if they persist? If they persist, it means that there is this is one inferior vena cava, you will have one inferior vena cava in the left side also. That means it will lead to double inferior vena cava, okay, double inferior vena cava, and it's most commonly if the left sacrocardinal vein persists. Understand? This is your left sacro, left supra and left subcardinal, okay. So if there is two left sacro or the left sacrocardinal vein persists, then there will be right inferior vena cava as well as the left inferior vena cava, that's called as double inferior vena cava, okay, right. So this is about the veins, okay. Now we'll move on to the formation of the arteries, okay, formation of arch arteries, pharyngeal arch arteries, okay, right. So if you take, we know the truncus arteriosus, the end of the or the cranial part of the truncus arteriosus will forms the aortic sac, okay, and from this aortic sac 2 horns arise, okay, the right horn and the left horn, okay, right horn and the left horn, okay, and from the right horn and the left horn the pharyngeal arch arteries arise, okay, pharyngeal arch arteries arise, okay. So you have the heart, you have the aortic sac, then the aortic horn of aortic sac, then you have the pharyngeal arch arteries, okay. This pharyngeal arch arteries, right, this is like this, okay, the pharyngeal horn, okay, and in inferiorly you have 2 dorsal aorta which will fuses to give rise to single dorsal aorta, okay. So this is how I'll show you, like, can you see here, this is the aortic sac that is arise from the truncus arteriosus, and you have 2 horns, right aortic horn and the left aortic horns, okay. From the horns the pharyngeal arch arteries arises, and this is the dorsal aorta, right and left dorsal aorta, and as they progress inferiorly, they will fuse together to form a single dorsal aorta. Okay, so there are 5 arch arteries. Okay, out of this 1, 2 and the 5 will regress. Okay, 1, 2 and the 5 will regress. Okay, 3, 4 and 6 will form the arch arteries. Okay, now the remnant of the first arch artery forms the maxillary artery. Okay, and the remnant of the second arch artery it forms the stapedial artery. We know that there is no fifth pharyngeal arch, so no fifth pharyngeal artery. Okay, no remnant. Okay, right. So this is the first arch artery and second arch artery. I told you the remnant of the first arch artery forms the maxillary artery, and the remnant of the second arch artery forms the stapedial artery. Now coming to the third arch artery. The third arch artery, it will give rise to the internal carotid and the common carotid artery. Okay, third arch artery will give rise to the internal carotid and common carotid artery. The fourth arch artery, they will forms the fourth arch artery forms the right I'll first say the right fourth arch artery will form the right subclavian artery, and the left fourth arch artery. The left fourth arch artery will form the arch of aorta or the aortic arch. Okay. The subclavian artery, the right subclavian artery, it is formed from the fourth arch artery, I told you. But along with the fourth arch artery, it will get some other help. Okay, it will get help from some other arteries also. What are they? They are the part of dorsal aorta and the seventh cervical intersegmental artery. Understand? So this much, the fourth arch artery, the dorsal aorta and the seventh cervical intersegmental artery, they together will forms the right subclavian artery. Okay, aortic arch. The aortic arch is formed by the left fourth arch artery, and along with the left fourth arch artery, the left horn of the aortic sac, also forms the part of aortic arch. Okay, so this two, left fourth arch artery and the left horn of the aortic sac together forms the aortic arch. Okay, so this is about the fourth arch artery. Now moving on to the sixth arch artery. Right, the sixth arch artery, it has two parts. Okay, the proximal part forms the pulmonary artery. The proximal forms the pulmonary artery. The distal, right, the right and left, you know, right and left pulmonary artery. So the proximal part, right and left pulmonary artery, and the distal part, it forms the ductus arteriosus. Okay, ductus arteriosus, I think you know, it is a connection between the proximal artery and the aorta, right? So the distal part of which? Distal part of the left, because the right will degenerate. Okay, only the left arch artery, the distal part of the left arch artery will forms the ductus arteriosus. The right will degenerate. Okay, so this is the fate of the arch arteries. Okay, right? So the first, second, third, I told you, first will form the maxillary artery, the second will form the stapedial artery, third arch internal carotid and common carotid artery, the fourth arch artery right subclavian and the aortic arch. I told you how along with the, then sixth arch artery, the proximal part forms the pulmonary artery and the distal part forms the ductus arteriosus. Okay, right. So now what I want to tell you about some clinical significance of this arch arteries. The first clinical significance, we know the ductus arteriosus. It will close after 10 to 15 hours of birth, right? What happens if this ductus arteriosus doesn't close? It doesn't close even after 4 days. 4 days, then it will lead to a condition called as PDA, patent ductus arteriosus. Okay, this is a cyanotic heart disease. Okay, a cyanotic heart disease. So that is the first condition. That is the first condition, PDA, patent ductus artery. The second condition that I'm telling you, I told you the right subclavian artery. Right subclavian artery is formed from the fourth arch artery, then the dorsal aorta, and from the seventh intersegmental artery, right? What happens if the fourth arch artery, okay, the fourth arch artery obliterates and part of the dorsal aorta that is between the that is proximal to the seventh intersegmental artery obliterate? So what all will obliterate? The fourth arch artery obliterates, the part of dorsal aorta that is proximal to the seventh intersegmental artery obliterate. Okay, so these two will obliterate, right? Now what happens if you take the right subclavian artery? Okay, the new abnormal right subclavian artery, it forms of dorsal aorta which is distal to seventh intersegmental artery plus the seventh intersegmental artery. Okay, so this is the new right subclavian artery and it will have a aberrant course. Okay, aberrant course. Okay, it will have a aberrant course. Okay, that means it will come behind the esophagus. Okay, behind the esophagus, it will comes behind the esophagus. Okay, and this causes dysphagia, and this artery is called as the Lusurian artery, and this dysphagia is called as the Lusurian dysphagia. Understand? Instead of the normal formation of right subclavian artery, the right subclavian artery has an abnormal formation. That is, it will only form from the seventh intersegmental artery as well as from the part of dorsal aorta that is distal to the seventh intersegmental artery. Okay, fourth arch artery obliterates as well as the part of dorsal aorta that is proximal to this seventh cervical intersegmental artery also obliterated. So that two parts will obliterate, and from the rest of the part only the right subclavian artery will originate. Okay, so it will have an aberrant course, that it will pass behind the esophagus causing dysphagia, and this right subclavian artery is called as the Lusarian artery and that dysphagia is called as Lusarian dysphagia. Understand? This is the second abnormality. Now coming to the third abnormality, we know I told you there is right dorsal aorta and left dorsal aorta. Okay, right? Usually the caudal part of right dorsal aorta will disappear. Okay, the caudal part of the right dorsal aorta will disappear, right? So that there will be only one dorsal aorta inferiorly. Okay, what happens? This the caudal part of the right dorsal aorta persists. If this persists, so we will have two inferior vena cava, it is dorsal aorta. Okay, we will have right dorsal aorta as well as the left dorsal aorta. Okay, and that condition is called as dorsal aorta and left dorsal aorta. That is called as double aorta. Okay, it is called as double aorta. Understand? Right dorsal aorta and left dorsal aorta. Usually the right caudal part of the right dorsal aorta will disappear, only the left will persist, forming the aorta. Okay, but what happens if the right dorsal aorta caudal part persists? Then it will lead to double aorta. Understand? This is the third clinical condition. Okay, now there are two more arteries that is seen associated with the heart, which is the our right brachiocephalic artery. So what is this right brachiocephalic artery formed from? The right brachiocephalic artery is formed from the right horn of aortic sac. Okay, aortic sac. You know, the left horn of the aortic sac will form the aortic arch along with the left fourth arch artery, right? Right brachiocephalic artery will be formed from the right horn of the aortic sac, right? Then the external carotid artery. The external carotid artery is formed from the carotid bud. Okay, it is formed from the carotid bud. Okay, so with this we have completed the pharyngeal arch arteries and the arteries that's associated with the heart. Okay, now we will move on to the fetal circulation. Okay, fetal circulation, very simple topic. I told you that which is the vessel that will carry the oxygenated blood from the placenta? It is the umbilical vein, right? Umbilical vein. Which umbilical vein? Left umbilical vein, because we know the right umbilical vein has obliterated, right? So the left umbilical vein will brings the blood to the fetus, okay, and it reaches the liver, right? But is it going to pass through the liver? No, it will get shunted via ductus venosus. So this is the first connection, and now it will goes to where? It will goes to the inferior vena cava. Okay, right? So the placenta will take the oxygenated blood brings the oxygenated blood via the left umbilical vein. It reaches the ductus venosus, shunts through the liver, and reaches the inferior vena cava. From inferior vena cava, it will be moved on to the right atrium. The blood will pass to the right atrium. From right atrium, it will pass to the right ventricle. Is there any other pathway? Yes, via the foramen ovale. Okay, via the foramen ovale, right? From foramen ovale, it is passed through the left atrium. Okay, passed to the left atrium. Okay, then from the left atrium, it passed through the left ventricle, right? So from the right ventricle, it is then passed through the pulmonary artery, and from the left ventricle, it is passed to the aorta, right? Is there a connection that is between the pulmonary artery and aorta? Yes, that is the ductus arteriosus. Okay, right? Then from the aorta, it will go into the common iliac artery. Okay, common iliac artery. From the common iliac artery, it will be moved on to the umbilical artery, right? From the umbilical artery, it will pass down to the placenta. Okay, so the blood that is coming from the placenta is oxygenated blood, which will be carried by the right umbilical vein, and the blood that is coming from the umbilical artery, it is the deoxygenated blood. Okay, and the blood that had undergone the circulation in the fetus is get deoxygenated and moved to the placenta. Okay, so which are the connections? The ductus venosus, the foramen ovale, and the ductus arteriosus. These are the connection that is seen in the fetus. Okay, so this is the fetal circulation. Okay, about the closure of this connections. Okay, we have seen so many connections, right? So we need to know how these connections closes. So which are the connections? The first one is the ductus venosus. Then you have the foramen ovale. Then you have the ductus arteriosus. Okay, take the closure of these connections. Okay, they have physiological closure and anatomical closure. Physiological closure means that connection is not working. Okay, it is not working, but that channel is present. Okay, the physiological closure means that connection is not, the blood is not going to pass through that connection, but the channel is present. Okay, anatomical closure means that channel will disappear. Okay, that is called as anatomical closure. Okay, so ductus venosus, when the physiological closure will act, the ductus venosus, the physiological closure will occur immediately after the placental removal. Okay, when the placenta is removed, the ductus venosus closes physiologically, and the anatomical closure is usually on 7th day. Okay, now foramen ovale, this will close immediately after birth. Okay, immediately after birth, the physiological closure occurs immediately after birth. But what about the anatomical closure? It will take around 1 month to 1 year. Okay, 1 month to 1 year. 1 month to 1 year, right? Ductus arteriosus, it will usually close after 10 to 15 hours. Okay, physiological closure occurs due to the vasospasm. Okay, and it will take around 10 to 15 hours for the ductus arteriosus to close, right? The anatomical closure usually takes around 1 month. Okay, 21 days. Okay, what happens if this anatomical closure is not occurring for 4 days? Even after 4 days, this is not anatomical, the physiological closure is not occurring. If the physiological closure doesn't occur more than 96 hours, then we will give prostaglandin. Okay, prostaglandins, right? We will give prostaglandins. But physiological closure has occurred, but the anatomical closure is not occurring even after 12 weeks. Then we will go for surgical correction. Okay, about the ductus arteriosus I am speaking. Okay, if usually the physiological closure occurs within 10 to 15 hours. Okay, the ductus arteriosus should be closed. Okay, if that closure is not occurring even after 96 hours, then we will give prostaglandins. Okay, and the anatomical closure should be occurred within 1 month. If that is not occurring even after 12 weeks, that is around 3 months. Okay, if that is the anatomical closure of the ductus arteriosus is not occurring even after 12 weeks, then we will go for surgical correction. Okay, so this is about the embryology of the cardiovascular system. Thank you.